Have you ever been part of something, maybe an organization, a volunteer group, or even like a really close team, where everyone's just pouring everything in, max effort, tons of passion, but then the whole thing just hits a ceiling. It plateaus. You feel the burnout creeping in. You see the mission kind of drifting, and you're left thinking, is survival just, well, is it just luck? Well, looking at the sources we've dug into for this deep dive, it seems it's definitely not luck. It's something baked right into the DNA of the structure itself. We're looking at a really powerful roadmap today, a process, a replicable one that organizations can use to shift gears, to move from just surviving to actually multiplying relentlessly, creating a rhythm that feeds itself. So if you're tired of launching program after program only to see all that hard work just sort of level off instead of really taking off, then yeah, this deep dive is absolutely for you.
That's spot on. Our mission today really is to unpack the crucial difference, both philosophical and structural, between two paths. Building what we're calling a monument versus cultivating a movement. A monument, it tends to prioritize preservation, keeping what it has, while a movement, that's all about intentional, self-sustaining reproduction. So we need to walk through some clear metrics, some practical frameworks, and strategies people can actually use. Strategies to guard against that mission drift, that burnout that often comes with just treading water. Because the old ways of thinking about growth, the traditional models, they're struggling. They just can't keep up with how fast culture is shifting these days. We need a new operating system, basically.
Okay, let's jump right into that. That fundamental DNA shift you mentioned, we hear those terms monument and movement. But what does that distinction actually, look like day to day? Is it just about whether you have that big building or not? Or is there something deeper, a real observable difference in how they prioritize things, how they function?
Oh, it's absolutely an internal shift, a deep one. The sources make it really clear this goes way beyond just physical structures. So the monument model, think centralized leadership, usually, and infrastructure that's, well, costly, often really hard to duplicate elsewhere, plus a culture that, maybe without even meaning to, ends up prioritizing stability, keeping things safe, protecting the assets over taking risks.
Right, and their metrics reflect that.
Exactly. The metrics are often about, well, sometimes called vanity metrics. Things like attendance numbers, how big the budget is, how many programs are running. The underlying goal is keeping the existing thing going, preservation. Now, the movement model, it's kind of the opposite. It's built for spreading out, decentralized. It focuses on gatherings that are easy to reproduce, low barriers to entry, and it fosters this deep culture of sending people out, not hoarding them or the resources.
Great.
And their metrics, they track reproductive health. How many disciples are making disciples? How many new units are launching? How many leaders are being identified and sent out? They're optimized for spread, for resilience.
That makes a lot of sense. Preservation naturally leads to staying put, right, to spaces. But what stops organizations, even when starting with the best intentions, from making that shift towards being a movement? You mentioned something that's really intriguing from the sources. This idea of the ghost in the machine. What's that about?
The ghost in the machine. That's maybe the biggest hurdle. It's powerful because it's often unseen. It's the leftover bits of that preservation culture. It's the unwritten rules, maybe specific policies, the way incentives are set up. All the things that reward playing it safe, staying comfortable, focusing inward rather than outward, It's that subtle, almost invisible friction that just slowly kills the instinct to reproduce. Because people get rewarded, subtly or overtly, for keeping the current system cozy, not for the courageous act of sending.
Can you give us a really concrete example? Like, what does that ghost look like? Is it the giant 100-page policy manual or something simpler?
It's often the simpler things, the everyday stuff. Maybe you have like a 2-year process just to approve a new leader. Well, that's the ghost slowing everything down.
Right, bureaucracy.
Exactly. Or if your budget heavily rewards programs that keep existing members happy and engaged, but there's hardly any money or support for launching new, potentially risky initiatives outside the walls. That's the ghost too. It's basically any system or policy designed primarily to reduce risk to the current setup. And that almost always leads to stagnation down the line.
What I find fascinating here is how the sources connect this need to shift back to something really foundational, a kind of philosophical logic. This multiplication idea isn't just pitched as like a smart management technique. It's framed as almost an essential part of a generative identity.
That's precisely it. The sources root this whole multiplication mandate in a worldview that sees life itself as inherently generative, that life should be fruitful, it should reproduce. The point they're making is that multiplication isn't just another program you can choose to add on. It's supposed to be an expression of the core character of the system itself. If the organization's DNA is genuinely healthy and generative, like a healthy organism, it should reproduce naturally. If it's not reproducing, well, then the system's compromised somehow, no matter how big and impressive its monument looks.
Okay, let's dig into this then. If the goal is this relentless, self-sustaining multiplication, we need to talk structure. What are the actual practical reproducible structures you need? How do you make sure the movement doesn't just grow additively, but genuinely replicates itself without constant central control?
Right. Well, the single biggest killer of replication is what the sources call complexity creep.
Complexity creep, okay.
Yeah. When your processes, your programs, your leadership requirements become too intricate, too expensive, or need highly specialized people who are basically irreplaceable,
Right.
they become monuments themselves, things that can't be easily picked up and replicated somewhere else by ordinary people.
So the antidote.
Is reproducible simplicity,
Yeah.
absolute simplicity. And that immediately forces you to define your minimal reproducible unit, the MRU.
The MRU, okay.
Think of it as the smallest possible viable expression of your core function. It's the reproductive cell of your organization.
Yeah.
And the key is, it has to be simple enough that you could teach someone how to start one, maybe using just a single sheet of paper, or in about an hour.
Wow, okay. That's simple.
Yeah. So if you're running, say, a community service group, the MRU might be the simplest 3-person team that can run a basic outreach event without needing constant direction from headquarters. The sources often suggest this core unit should be pretty small, maybe 6 to 12 people, focused on the absolute core mission, maybe some prayer or reflection, basic instruction, but crucially, it has to be portable, easy to launch anywhere.
That completely reframes the task, doesn't it? You're not asking a new leader to build this huge, complex thing from day one. You're asking them to just host a simple, repeatable gathering. And I love how the sources back this up with really clear, simple math. Tell us about this 1-year-9 pathway.
The 1-year-9 pathway. It's basically the antidote to just hoping growth happens accidentally. It makes discipleship or leadership development intentional, trackable even. The principle is super simple. Each existing trained person commits to investing deeply in just one other person, really pouring into them.
One-on-one, okay.
Then that person, once they're ready, invests in 3 others, and then those 3, once they're established, each invest in 3 more, which gets you to 9. So 1 leads to 3 leads to 9. The simplicity means everyone knows their specific part. And when this kind of intentionality ripples through the whole network, the growth starts to compound exponentially, not just linearly.
So it's really about focusing on depth, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the idea that depth will naturally create breadth over time. But for these small units, these MRUs, to actually survive and thrive, they need some kind of support system, right? An ecosystem. You mentioned 4 essential scales of relationships.
Oh, absolutely. They definitely need an ecology. You can't just have micro units floating around disconnectedly. If you only have those tiny groups, you lose cohesion, maybe the bigger vision gets lost. But if you only have the big gatherings, you lose the depth, the personal formation. So the sources lay out 4 functional scales. Each one serves a really specific vital purpose for the movement's overall health. So first up is scale A, micro. This is that core discipleship piece, the one-on-one or maybe very small groups of multipliers. Its main purpose, deep character formation, and actually transmitting the practices, the how-to, not just dumping information. It's that life-on-life
It's
invite.
real hands-on stuff.
Exactly. Then you've got scale B, meso. Think of these as the community laboratories. These are slightly larger groups, maybe 3 to 30 people. Microchurch networks, maybe operational teams for a project. Their job is practice, peer-to-peer learning and formation. And crucially, this is where you spot potential leaders in a relatively low-risk setting. It's where people get to try things out, maybe fail safely, and learn.
Let me jump in there because scale B sounds like the real engine room, maybe. If I'm running, say, a nonprofit with local chapters, is scale B like the local chapter? The group that tries a project, learns from it, develops leaders without waiting for permission from the central office.
Precisely. That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
It's the training ground.
Yeah.
It's where the rubber meets the road for leadership development. Now, next up is scale C gatherings. These are your larger corporate gatherings. the main church service perhaps, or the annual conference for an organization. The purpose here is less about that deep personal formation and more about casting the big vision, ensuring everyone's aligned theologically or missionally across the network. And it's often where you have public commissioning rituals, the sending ceremonies. It reinforces the culture.
The big picture view.
Right. And finally, there's scale D, macro. This is the broader network ecosystem itself, the regional partnerships, maybe global alliances, its purpose. Things like sharing resources effectively, building resilience through diversity, learning from different contexts, and allowing for cross-pollination of ideas and best practices. You really need all four scales working together healthily to have a system that's both deeply rooted and capable of wide expansion.
Okay, this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. If we're serious about moving from monument to movement, we basically have to throw out the old scoreboard, right?
Yeah.
If we stop obsessing over attendance, donations, building size, what do we measure instead? How do we make sure the organization doesn't just dissolve into like chaotic enthusiasm with no accountability?
Yeah, you absolutely need a new scoreboard. You shift entirely to metrics that track reproduction, metrics that measure the actual health and depth of the multiplication, not just the size or volume. The sources point to three core indicators for this new movement scoreboard. First one is the obedience rate. OR. Now, this sounds maybe a bit intense, but it's about tracking active multiplication behaviors.
Behaviors, okay. Like what?
Things like, are people actively sharing the core mission or message? Are they initiating discipleship relationships? Are they actually starting new MRUs, those minimal units we talked about? The goal here is to reinforce high obedience, not just high knowledge. Knowledge is relatively passive, easy to test with a quiz, but action, actual deployment. That's the real measure of whether the training or formation is sticking.
Wow, that is a radical shift. It changes the whole leadership conversation. It's not just, did you go to the training session? It's, okay, what active reproducible thing did you actually do as a result?
Yeah.
But I have to ask, how do you stop a metric like obedience rate from just creating a culture where people are just ticking boxes? You know, performing compliance rather than experiencing real transformation.
That is the absolute critical challenge, you're right. And the sources are really clear on this. These dashboards, these metrics, they have to be used to guide pastoral care and coaching, not for punishment, not for bureaucratic judgment. If someone's OR is low, the response isn't condemnation. It's mentoring. Maybe they need more resources, maybe a different approach. The focus has to stay on the outcome, the reproductive behavior. And using things like short training cycles, maybe 12 weeks, like the sources suggest, helps. Because you learn competence by doing it almost immediately. That reduces the risk of just checking a box for a course finished months ago. Okay, the second key metric is apprenticeship throughput, AT. This one tracks the conversion rates for leadership development.
Conversion rates.
Meaning, from the moment someone is identified as having leadership potential, how many of them actually make it through the process to being commissioned and actively deployed. The sources suggest aiming for something like a 50% conversion ratio here. It forces you to look at your pipeline. Is it leaky? Is it bottlenecked by overly long training programs or super complex requirements that weed out perfectly capable people?
Okay, so you've got people taking action, obedience rate, and you've got a clear pathway for new leaders coming through, apprenticeship throughput. But if the ultimate goal is truly self-sustaining spread, how do you know if the DNA, the core multiplication instinct, has actually embedded itself into the culture?
That's where the real acid test comes in. It's generational depth, GD, sometimes called the fourth generation test, or G4.
G4, okay, break that down.
So imagine you're the founder or the initial disciple maker. You're G0, generation 0. You disciple someone, that's G1. They disciple someone, that's G2. G2 disciples G3. That's all good, but it could still rely on your initial energy. But G4, that's the game changer. If your G3 people can reliably produce G4 disciples or leaders, meaning multiplication is happening culturally on its own without any direct input or intervention from you or the original central leadership.
I see. It's multiplying by itself.
Exactly. Then you know the DNA is truly self-replicating. It's become part of the culture. Tracking that G4 metric tells you almost everything about your organization's long-term future. If you only ever get to G1 and G2, you probably just have a crowd following a charismatic leader or a good program. If you're seeing G4 consistently, you likely have a sustainable movement on your hands. And that 12-month movement reboot plan mentioned in the sources, it's designed specifically to drive towards this. Months 1 to 3 are just laser-focused on teaching the why, the theology or philosophy of multiplication. Then months 4 to 6 are about training and piloting the simple successful MRUs. And months 7 to 9 are about actively releasing and resourcing those new teams. It's a deliberate pathway to try and achieve that G4 depth.
So putting this all together, what does it mean for the long haul? For endurance? Because successful movements, they often attract new things, right? Money, buildings, prestige, and those very things can tempt them right back into becoming monuments again. How do you guard against that mission drift? And how do you prevent the leadership burnout that seems almost inevitable when you're managing something that stopped growing?
Yeah, the biggest enemy here is that deep-seated fear that drives what the sources call preservation culture. Success itself can breed a fear of loss.
Fear of losing what you've gained.
Exactly. Fear of losing stability, maybe losing key people if you send them out, losing status or influence. And that fear generates new rules, new incentives, new policies, all designed to reward what feels safe and measurable and controllable, like keeping everyone close over what's actually faithful to the multiplication mission, which often involves sending your best people into the unknown. So this requires a pretty revolutionary shift in how leaders see themselves, their identity. Leaders have to adopt what's called a steward-sent posture.
Steward set, meaning
Meaning, instead of thinking like an owner who needs to control and hold on to the asset, they need to lead like a steward. Someone who carefully tends the roots, nurtures the vine, but fully expects, even desires, to see that vine spread far beyond their own garden. They're preparing it to be sent.
and the sources actually give a practical, almost structural way to enforce this, don't they? This idea of role typing.
Absolutely. Role typing is a non-negotiable commitment. It mandates that every leader spends a fixed percentage of their time. The sources often suggest around 20% actively, intentionally investing in one specific developing leader or potential successor.
20%, that's significant.
It is. The point isn't just about being a generally good mentor, it's about becoming a teacher of teachers. Your primary job shifts from accumulating your own students or followers who depend on you to multiplying other teachers and leaders. You're deliberately working to make your current role less essential over time.
And this ties directly into that counterintuitive idea about resilience, right? The sources bring up the Acts 8 paradox from the Bible, where persecution forced people to scatter, but that very scattering caused the message to spread rapidly. Security isn't found in hunkering down, but in movement.
That's the core principle of distributed resilience. Think about it. When all your vital resources, all your key people are concentrated in one big, heavy monument, well, that's a single point of failure. If that monument gets hit by an economic downturn, a cultural shift, a leadership crisis, the whole system is incredibly vulnerable. It could collapse. But when life, energy, leadership, resources are distributed across countless small, lightweight, simple MRUs and empowered local leaders, the system becomes incredibly resilient. It's adaptive. You can't kill it with a single blow because it's everywhere and nowhere specific. And there are practical ways to safeguard this. Things like building in a Sabbath architecture, intentional, scheduled rhythms of rest and withdrawal for leaders. That helps prevent the burnout that comes from trying to centrally manage everything constantly. And also implementing things like simple accountability triads, just small groups, maybe 3 deployed leaders who meet regularly. Not for heavy reporting, but for mutual support, peer coaching, maybe checking in on each other's obedience rates in a supportive way. These small-scale mechanics help keep the fire alive in individuals without letting them burn out. Hashtag tag outro. So, if we were to boil down the core takeaway from all this analysis, it really comes down to a choice, a fundamental daily choice for every organizational leader. You can choose to focus your energy on preserving a building, a structure, an institution, which is often costly and hard to maintain and always risks stagnation. Or you can commit your energy to cultivating a living, reproducing organism that's designed to spread autonomously.
And the key actionable insight, the thing you can maybe start thinking about today, is this. Real multiplication seems to need 2 critical things. First, structural simplicity. That means really defining your minimal reproducible unit and ruthlessly sticking to it, resisting that complexity creep. And second, a relentless focus on relationships and reproduction. Start tracking that generational depth. Forget the old scoreboard for a minute. Are your G3 leaders actually raising up G4 leaders? That metric tells you almost everything about the true, self-replicating health and future of whatever you're leading. So we'll leave you with this final, maybe provocative thought, building on that vineyard idea. Take an honest look. Is your organization, your team, your movement, is it fundamentally designed to conserve? Like a majestic old oak tree or an ornate garden that needs constant, careful tending from the center?
Yeah.
Or is it designed to multiply, like a resilient bamboo grove that spreads underground, or an ever-blooming vineyard that keeps producing new shoots? Remember, sending people out, decentralizing control, It always feels like a risk. It involves temporary loss, maybe. But the sources argue it's the only path to long-term flourishing and genuine resilience against the inevitable storms. The goal isn't to end up with a beautifully maintained mausoleum. It's to cultivate a living, breathing, self-sustaining forest.